I'd just like to point out that there was no irresponsible riding during the making of this video. It was all done with special effects. Right, so this week we're going to upgrade the front forks with the Hagon progressive springs, change the fork oil and get rid of those ugly Triumph headlamp brackets, replacing them with those lovely MOTONE ones. Now these MOTONE brackets are one of MOTONE's signature products, CNC machined from aircraft grade aluminium billet. They come finished in black and they've been machined to exacting standards, complete with MOTONE's signature. Now of course you could accuse me of being biased, but I don't honestly think that there is a better looking, better quality aftermarket headlamp bracket out there. MOTONE have taken the cafe racer look one step further by completely machining out the central part of the bracket, giving it a modern minimalist twist. Likewise, the fastening strap at the back has been cut away in a similar manner, making the bracket contrast starkly with the brushed chrome of the fork stanchions in a way that's really pleasing to the eye, giving a more cut back racy look. They come complete with stainless steel Allen screws and they're a piece of cake to fit. Now to complement those Hagon Nitro piggyback shocks that I fitted a few months ago, in this video I'm going to be fitting the Hagon progressive fork springs, which were specifically designed for the air-cooled Bonneville twins, along with Silcolene's RSF5 fork suspension fluid. Now I'm not going to go into too much details about these products and why I chose them in this video, because when I fitted the Nitro piggyback some time ago I did promise a full review once I'd got the suspension completely upgraded, and that's going to follow in this Friday's video. Now the first thing you need to do is get the front wheel of the bike up off the ground to take all the tension off those springs, and also so that you can remove the front wheel. Obviously I use my jack, but you can do the same with some blocks and wood, providing you got someone to help you with the lifting and manoeuvring of the bike. Once you've done that, unfasten your front brake caliper, and with a slight wiggling motion just to separate the pads slightly, withdraw it from your disc and then just tie it back out of the way so it's not swinging about and it's not going to damage itself or anything that it hits. Then it's time to get the front wheel off. First of all, you need to loosen the pinch bolt at the bottom of the right hand fork leg. When that's done, using the appropriate side sockets, remove the nut from the left hand side of your axle. Remove the nut and its washer. And then carefully remove the axle while supporting the wheel. Now pay attention to what spaces you have attached to the wheel and which way around they go. Replace the axle, the washer and the nut back onto the wheel. Don't put them back into the fork legs. You can then get your wheel out of the way and put it somewhere safe. Now this full procedure is described in the Haynes manual for the air-cooled twins. Remove your front mudguard and the bracket that holds it in place. Now the next thing to do is just to crack open the fork caps, because unless you have suitable equipment it's going to be very difficult to do that once you've removed the fork legs. To do this you might have to loosen your handlebars slightly and just drop them back out of the way, but this is going to vary between different models. So as I've said, once you've done that, just crack open the fork caps. Then it's time to remove the fork legs. We're only going to service one fork leg at a time, and which side you start on is entirely up to you. To get the fork leg off, simply slacken off the pinch bolts on the top and bottom yokes and the whole fork assembly should just slide out. Make sure you've got some bits of wood or rags handy so that for the next part of this procedure you don't scratch or damage your fork leg, and make sure that you've got a suitable container for the used fork oil at hand. Then placing the bottom of your fork leg on the floor using an appropriate sized socket, remove the end cap all the way. Be careful because it is under a little bit of tension. Remove your fork cap and put it somewhere safe. then remove your spacer. Tip your fork upside down into the container that you've made ready and pour out the old fork oil. Now as you do this, your washer and your old spring should also fall out, so just be mindful of that. Remove them and put them to one side. Now as you're pouring the fork oil out, pump the fork as many times as necessary to try and get as much of the fork oil out into that container as possible. Then with your fork leg still turned upside down, suspend it or lean it over a container and leave it to drain for a good half hour, 40 minutes to get as much fork oil out as possible. When it's done that, you're then ready to refill it with fresh fork oil and reassemble with your new springs. Now Triumph recommend 499 millilitres of fork oil per fork leg, and they also recommend that you use a 10 weight fork oil. Now 499 millilitres equates to approximately a 109 millimetre air gap. With their springs, Hagon recommend a 20 weight oil and a 150 millimetre air gap. Now the Hagon spring is a slightly softer spring than the standard spring, so the additional viscosity of the 20 weight oil is designed to compensate for the difference in spring tension, but in doing so they've dropped the volume of oil that's used so that you've got more pneumatic damping. Air compresses quite easily, so what it's doing is it's giving you a larger volume of air to compress to aid with the fork damping, or at least I think that's what's going on, because you also have to take into account that a softer spring has more tightly wound coils, so it is going to displace more of your fork oil. But suffice to say that there is some serious Hagon voodoo witchcraft going on here, which makes for a superlative front suspension compared to what I had before. And I have to say that the results are astounding. I'll go into that in the next video. Now, it's always been my practice to dispense the amount of oil required into a clean jug prior to pouring it into the fork leg. The reason being that as it glugs out of the bottle, it causes a lot of bubbles and cavitation, which obviously is going to displace the liquid and so give you a false level. And what I usually do is leave it for half an hour for those bubbles to float to the surface, burst, and then I know what level I've got. Silcoline have engineered this liquid really well because I didn't get a single bubble, so there was actually no need for me to do that, but I will continue to follow this procedure anyway, and it is good practice. Now, I poured more into the jug than I knew that I needed, and the reason for that is that I have a fork oil level tuning tool. These used to be really expensive, and they are quite a simple piece of apparatus really, but they are very accurate. In a situation like this where you're pouring the oil out, there's always going to be some residue of the old oil in the forks, and that might not be equal in both fork legs. So simply pouring exactly the same amount into each fork leg won't necessarily give you the same level in each fork leg. This tool is very simple to use. It has a very accurate sliding scale and it ensures that the level is exactly the same in both legs. Once you've got your fork oil tuning tool set up to the 150mm air gap, it's time to pour the oil into your fork leg. Now, in order to do this, your fork leg must be completely compressed, i.e. the stanchion should be pushed down into the fork leg as far as it will go. It will be very easy because there's no spring in there. Pour all or as much of the oil in as you can possibly get in the first go. The reason I say this is that your damping rod will be empty, it'll be full of air, and you've got to displace that air and fill it with oil. And to do this, you have to pump the fork leg in order to push the oil through your damping rod and dispel any air. Now, the manual suggests 15 to 20 pumps to do this, but what I would recommend is this. When you're pumping it, you can feel and hear the cavitation in the damping rod. You'll be able to hear it gurgling and spluttering. If it's doing that, it's still got air in it. Just continue to pump it until it becomes smooth and silent. In this case, I found it took about 25 pumps per leg to achieve that. The last thing you want to do is take a level with your tool only to find that there was a big cup full of air still stuck in the damping rod when you took that measurement, and then have to repeat all this procedure again because your suspension isn't working properly. When you've done that, using the syringe on your tuning tool with the measuring ring sitting flat on the top of your fork stanchion, withdraw any excess oil until it just sucks air in. Then you know that you've got the perfect 150 milliliter air gap. And as I've said, remember to take this measurement with the fork stanchion pushed down as far as it will go. Now, I have to say I've had some fun and games with this in years gone by, but the quality of this Silcoline suspension fluid really does make this an easy job. And it's obvious that a lot of thought has been put into its formulation. When you're sure that you've got your level right, it's time to reassemble the fork. Put your new Hagon spring in with the tighter coils at the top. The reason for this being that if you put them at the bottom, they'll displace more oil and that'll foul up your air gap. Then pop your washer back in, making sure that it has seated properly in the bottom. And then replace your spacer. When you've done that, you can pop your cap back on. This is a little bit of a fiddly job because there is some spring pressure there, but if you're careful, you take your time and you use the right size socket, it should only take you 10 or 15 seconds to get that back on. Screw it down as far as you can hand tight, and then you can actually torque it up once it's fastened back onto the bike. Now once that's done, you've got one little job to do before you can refit it. The original headlamp bracket will still be in place. It'll be held in place by the actual bolt that holds it onto the headlamp. So unfasten that, and then it will simply withdraw from between the two yokes. Make sure that you also remove the two rubber mounting pieces because you don't want to leave those in place. Get your MOTONE headlamp bracket and loosen off the bolts to make sure that it's going to be loose enough to slide back onto your fork stanchion as you put your fork stanchion back on. Then from underneath, it's the exact reverse as when you took your fork leg off. Insert the top of it through the bottom of your yoke, making sure to thread your new headlamp bracket onto it as you go, and then push it up through the top yoke. Now you should have left your other fork leg in place while you were doing this, so you can now use that to take a measurement to make sure that this is fastened up at exactly the right height above the top yoke as it originally was. Once you're happy with its placement, nip up the pinch bolts on the top and bottom yoke. You then repeat this entire procedure for the other fork leg. This might not be the quickest way of doing it, but it is the safest way of doing it, and it makes sure that you don't get any parts mixed up, you don't put any parts back where they shouldn't be, and you're not left in any doubt as to the height that they should be reset back at. When this is complete, reset your headlamp brackets to the correct level. You'll probably find that they will have to be dropped significantly, and when you've got your headlamp all lined up, just nip up the bolts at the back with a standard Allen key. Now you only need to tighten them just a little bit tighter than finger tight. These things have been machined to a really precise fit, so there's very little pressure needed to get a good tight fit. When that's done, get your Haynes manual out and go around every fastener that you've disturbed and tighten it up to the stated torque settings. Now refitting your wheel is the exact reverse of when you dismantled it, and when you've got everything back together and torqued back up, what you should have is a Bonneville with quite probably the best front suspension money can buy, and a very sexy pair of headlamp brackets to boot. Once again, thank you for watching this video. I'll leave links for the products that I've used while I was making this video, with the exclusion of the Hagon springs and the Silcoline fork oil. I'll cover them off in Friday's video and review. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that you found it useful. If you have enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel. As I've said, I'll be back on Friday, so until then, please ride safely and I'll see you soon.